Hello everyone. Today, I'll be presenting my project on the famous problem of induction. Specifically, I'll explain Hume's challenge, present Reichenbach's pragmatic defense of induction, critically evaluate whether his solution really works, and attempt my own defense of induction. So here's the overall structure for my presentation. I'll first outline Hume's problem, then describe Reichenbach's solution, then consider some major criticisms, give my evaluation, and finally propose my own solution. So who is David Hume? I guess from the website link, he is an infidel. But besides that, he is someone who has a serious issue with inductive reasoning. Hume argues that inductive reasoning, which is the idea that the future will resemble the past, has no rational foundation. He believes that we can't deduce the future from the past, and trying to justify induction by appealing to past success is circular. Thus, he concludes that we have no rational basis for believing that the patterns we observe will continue on in the future. And so we have Reichenbach. I have no idea if I'm saying his name right, but Reichenbach agrees with Hume. He agrees that we have no epistemological justification for induction. However, he offers a pragmatic solution for Hume's question. He does this by applying statistical induction, where we observe how often an event occurs and subsequent events will closely follow this observed frequency. This inductive principle is often referred to as the straight rule. So why do we follow this straight rule? Well, according to Reichenbach, it's because if there is a limit or frequency for events, we will eventually find it using the inductive principle. If I were to explain it more simply, in essence, if nature is uniform, induction will eventually converge on the truth, and that if nature isn't uniform, no method will work, so we lose nothing by choosing induction. So in essence, he believes that induction is one of the simplest ways for us to converge on this so-called truth. So why do I think Reichenbach's argument is a bit appealing? Well, for one, it's attractive because it's practical. It acknowledges that certainty is impossible, but it argues that success in the real world is good enough. So, in essence, no alternatives other than induction are better ways to arrive at this so-called truth. And it matches how science actually works by always updating our beliefs based on observation. And of course, for all famous proposed epistemological beliefs, there are critics. And the first one we have is a guy named Salmon. Salmon criticizes Reichenbach's defense for not being thorough enough. He criticized it for wrongly relying on simplicity to justify the rule of induction. Salmon believes that simplicity applies to statements, not to rules. So you can't just use simplicity to select a rule. And this was a very big issue for Salmon. He thought that this was a very big hole in Reichenbach's argument. And so to address this, he introduced normalizing conditions, which is the idea that frequencies must be positive and add up to 1, as well as linguistic invariance requirements, which is the idea that what matters for evidence to be good evidence is their content and not their linguistic expression. So using these conditions, Salmon eliminated other alternative inductive methods and defended the straight rule, which is just ordinary induction, as preferable. A second critic of Reichenbach is this guy named Bonjour. I don't know if he's French, but Bonjour states that Reichenbach doesn't address the core issue of Hume's problem. Bonjour argues that Reichenbach's defenses fail because they don't show that induction is truly epistemically justified. They just redefine what it means to believe reasonably without answering the skeptic. Thus, Bonjour believes that the pragmatic defense of Reichenbach doesn't escape Hume's skepticism. It just sidesteps it. In my view, Reichenbach's approach is pretty valuable because it embraces practical realism. However, its weakness is in that it doesn't fully resolve the logical problem that Hume raises. It tells us that induction is the best bet, but not that it's rationally certain. Thus, Reichenbach gives us reasons to use induction pragmatically, but not reasons to fully justify it epistemically. And that's where I come in. I believe that all this confusion of trying to prove induction is a matter of not being clear enough. For example, on the left, we have an example of inductive reasoning. Hume would suggest that knowing a domino fell when you tapped it would not signify that if you tap it again, the domino will fall. This leads into my issue with specificity. For the skeptic, they would wonder how you would know for certain that tapping a domino would make it fall. And so I think that we must clarify our statement. We have to add pre-propositions, such as under the condition that gravity is a part of the system, under the condition that electrons repel, under the condition that the world continues to function as it has. But now the skeptic asks, how do you know the world functioning as it has will lead to an outcome that always remains the same? James, your reasoning is circular. And so to this, I say, we must rely on foundationalism. On the right here, we have deductive reasoning. And I think that we can all agree that deductive reasoning relies on foundationalism. We see that Hume is always right, as well as Hume said we have no grounds for induction as basic propositions that we just assume is true. And so we arrive at the conclusion that we have no grounds for induction. So then I think that if all deductive reasoning relies on foundationalism, why shouldn't induction? Why not assume that electrons always repel is a basic proposition? Why not assume gravity always exists on Earth as a basic proposition? And so this obviously isn't completely fleshed out yet, but I hope you get the idea. I'll yap a bit more about this in my paper. Yeah. So here are my sources, and thanks for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about Reichenbach, Hume, the criticisms I discussed, as well as my proposed solution. Thanks again for watching, and yeah, bye-bye.